In 1970, on the frozen Kola Peninsula in the Soviet Arctic, a drill bit touched rock that no human eye would ever see directly, and kept going on and off for the next 2 decades. No oil target, no gold, no end point, but deeper. Just curiosity, aimed straight down. By 1989, the main shaft, designated SG-3, reached 40,230 feet, over 7.5 miles into the Earth's crust. It remains to this day the deepest hole humans have ever dug. Here's what almost nobody knows about it. It didn't stop because they ran out of nerve. It stopped because the Earth itself refused to cooperate with what scientists were certain they'd find. The plan was simple on paper. Geologists had built a model of the crust from seismic data. Sound waves bounced through rock, timed to measure how fast they traveled at different depths. At a certain point, around 23,000 feet, those waves sped up sharply. Scientists had a name for that signal, the Conrad discontinuity. It was supposed to mark a clean boundary, granite above, basalt below, one rock layer stacked on another like a cake with visible layers. The Kola borehole was going to drill straight through it and confirm the model. It never found that boundary. At the depth where basalt was supposed to begin, drillers pulled up rock that was still granite. Not the same granite from higher up, reshaped, metamorphosed by heat and pressure into something denser, but granite all the way through. The sharp seismic signal hadn't marked a change in rock type at all. It marked a change in the rock's physical state. And it meant something bigger. The continental crust wasn't layered the way the model assumed. It was granite, top to bottom. An entire picture of the planet's crust, built from measurements no one could verify without going and looking, turned out to be incomplete the moment someone actually drilled through it. Then it got stranger. At around 22,000 feet, over 4 miles down, drill cores came up containing microscopic fossils. More than 20 species of single-celled marine organisms, encased in rock over 2 billion years old, found at a depth where nothing was expected to have left a trace, buried in rock formed while the atmosphere itself was still being shaped by early life. The rock had been keeping a record nobody thought to look for. Then came the water. Standard geology said crystalline rock at that depth should be essentially dry, compressed too tightly under miles of stone for any moisture to persist. Instead, at nearly the same depth, drillers hit rock saturated with hot, mineral-rich water, flowing through fractures that weren't supposed to exist that far down. The chemistry suggested the water had been trapped there by an impermeable layer above it, sealed in for who knows how long. And the drilling mud came back boiling with hydrogen gas, along with helium, nitrogen, and carbon dioxide, released from reactions in rock that had never been exposed to open air before that moment. Every assumption the project was built to confirm, the whole quietly dismantled instead. And still it kept going. By the early 1990s, temperatures at the bottom of the shaft hit 356 degrees Fahrenheit, almost double the roughly 212 degrees the models had predicted for that depth. The rock down there stopped behaving like rock. Under that heat, it turned plastic, soft enough to slowly flow back into the borehole itself, closing the very hole they'd spent 20 years cutting. Drilling deeper became physically impossible. Not from lack of will. From the Earth folding the wound shut behind them. In 1992, the deepest branch of the hole was abandoned at the heat barrier. A final attempt from a shallower branch pushed on until 1994, when the funding simply ran out along with the country that had been paying for it. The site was fully abandoned by the following decade. Here's the part that should unsettle you. You've probably heard a different story about this hole, that microphones lowered into it recorded the screams of the damned, that Soviet scientists drilled into literal hell. That story is a hoax, invented decades after drilling ended, with no connection to any real recording or transcript. It spread because the true story alone wasn't dramatic enough for the internet, but the real story doesn't need embellishing. Because what actually happened at Kola is stranger than the myth. Not demons. Something closer to a wall between what we assume and what's actually down there. A wall we still haven't drilled past, on the one planet every human being who has ever lived has stood on. For comparison, a similar West German project, the KTB borehole in Bavaria, hit temperatures over 500 degrees Fahrenheit at barely half the depth of Kola, and had to stop for the same reason. An earlier American attempt, Project Moholy, tried to reach the crust from underneath the Pacific Ocean floor in the 1960s and was canceled for lack of funds before it got anywhere close. Going down, it turns out, is harder than going up. It's not that nobody has tried to go deep since. Scientists still dig, just not for the crust itself anymore. Detectors hunting for neutrinos, nearly massless particles born in exploding stars, have to be buried far below the surface to filter out the noise of everyday radiation. One of the largest such observatories sits under a mile of solid ice in Antarctica. Even that depth was easier to reach than the crust beneath our feet, because ice yields. Rock, past a certain point, does not. We have sent spacecraft past Pluto. We have photographed galaxies that formed before our sun existed, and the deepest any human tool has ever physically touched is a shaft about 9 inches wide, roughly 0.2% of the way to the planet's center. That shaft sits capped and rusting now in the Russian Arctic, near the Norwegian border, the drilling superstructure around it long since stripped and abandoned. Beneath it, another 3,950 miles of rock, magma, and molten iron that no drill, no probe, no camera has ever touched, and at the rate we're going, may never touch. Subscribe to Beyond Human. Every video is made by humans, for humans, and built from the same curiosity that makes questions like this one impossible to leave alone. Hit subscribe. There is a lot more where this came from.